Great. Well, I'm very excited to have Rachit Shadra, VP of Marketing from Wunder Mobility, on the line today. Welcome, Rachit.
Thank you, Ian. Good to be here.
Great. And so you're in Hamburg, which is great. I'm in Oakland, California. We've done quite a few conversations, probably with more of a North American slant. I know Wunder Mobility is a global entity, but looking forward to getting a little bit more of a European-centric view. With that said, it'd be great if you would maybe introduce, for those who don't know Wunder Mobility, a little bit about the business and about yourself.
Yep, for sure. So Wunder Mobility is a software as a service company, and we create technology that allows corporates, OEMs, and startups launch and scale mobility services. In addition to that, our technology also allows cities to analyze mobility services that are going on in their area to make sure that they're using that information for urban planning and policy making. So that's basically the core of our technology. In the future, like in the next couple of weeks, we will also be touching up a little bit more on our hardware capabilities. So keep looking out for that. Maybe we will talk more about it today. So basically, that's what we do. We have clients on all six continents. Some of the largest car sharing and scooter sharing companies use our technology to power their operations. And where we have our office in the US as well, in Los Angeles. Our HQ is in Hamburg, and we have a technical office in Dortmund in Germany as well. So that's basically a little bit of what our company does and what our background is. We're, I think, 5 years old, and companies from the range of Lufthansa to Daimler use our technology. I myself am an ex-entrepreneur from a marketing background, even though I studied computer science engineering and have been with Wunder for 3 years now. So almost a little bit of a dinosaur over here. That's basically a little bit of my experience. Come from India though.
Very good. Very good. So um, we're having this conversation, I think it's May 21st, 2020. And so, the COVID situation continues. However, you're sitting in Germany, where things are beginning to open a little bit. So for those of us not quite that far along in the situation, it's informative, right? So I'm sure personally, but also professionally, you're beginning to see the changes come to bear. And so I'd love to hear a little bit, certainly through the mobility lens, a little bit about what you're seeing change, or perhaps what change you see on the horizon in terms of mobility.
For sure. I think that Germany went through the eye of the storm in the beginning since we were in Europe. And because of the healthcare system and the way the government planned, they've been able to deal with it much better compared to a lot of other countries that are still dealing with it. When I look at it from a mobility perspective, of course, when I look at it from 1 month back, it's almost like, a deer stuck in the headlights. You're
Hmm.
there and all the lockdowns are happening. One third of the human population is not allowed to get out of their houses. Mobility was one of the industries that was hit hard, and I would not shy away from saying that. But what we've seen in the last maybe like 4 weeks or so is an absolute resurgence in the capability of the industry. I think that we've seen a lot, even on our platform, we've seen a lot of positive impact with a lot of our clients now going back to almost pre-corona levels, even though it's not as high as what it's supposed to be in the summer season during Europe, but we
Hmm.
expect this to grow much faster as lockdowns get, goes lower and lower. In Germany itself, now lockdown has been relaxed much more than it was 4 weeks back. Now they recently opened bars and pubs, probably because of the love of beer, and people can actually go out after work and have a couple of beers if they want to. Of course, we have to maintain social distancing, and we have to make sure all restaurants have to make sure that there are sanitized and stuff like that. And that is also something that a lot of our clients are doing. The second thing that happened that we see a very positive impact on is the emergence of e-bikes and light electric vehicles. We can see that I think that Move, which is another European manufacturer of e-bikes, recently raised, I think, 13 million or so to manufacture better e-bikes and scale their business. But even in within Germany and within Hamburg, where I'm living in, I can see a lot of people who own cars, or sorry, who did not own cars or relied on public transport, are now moving to either bike or public bicycle programs or subscription programs where they could just rent an e-bike rather than buying a personal car. That's the second major thing that has come out. A lot of people are moving towards bicycles and sustainable mobility rather than going towards buying a personalized vehicle, which is very positive. And the third most amazing thing is that the cities kind of noticed it and now are, using all the space available, almost using this entire crisis as a refresh button to clean the slate and give more power to pedestrians and bicycles and other means of sustainable mobility. So that's basically what we've seen overall. It's you can literally break it apart into two phases. The first phase was when everybody was trying to figure out what they could do, and the second phase was when they actually figured out what was really working, and they went on forward. In the first phase itself, one of the biggest things that we wanted to focus on as well was to make sure that the essential workforce kept on moving because that is something that eventually keeps us moving. Fortunately, you and I can talk on a digital call over Zoom, but 30% of the population are in jobs that cannot happen over Zoom. And they expose themselves to the virus, which is why we worked with the World Economic Forum to launch We All Move, which would work as a platform to fill in these information gaps. So that was like the first step. I think even Trōv is a part of it with your COVID offerings that you're providing to operators across the world. And now the platform is operating on 400 cities across the world. So we're pretty glad about that. That was the first step. The second step was when we saw, okay, now people are moving back to a new normal and people are moving back to using light electric vehicles, e-bikes, some shared mobility services, and that's basically the theme. And the cities are embracing it. So it's a very good, very positive aspect for the mobility industry.
So some really fascinating stuff in there when you think about the different angles, right? So from the consumer's perspective, shifting towards bicycle use, which is great on many levels, right? From a health perspective, and then the industry. So thank you for the We All Move action and activity around that. Very positive, and we're engaged with that. In our case, delivery has been a big initiative, and we've put some weight behind that. But then, so industry, consumers, and then the cities changing, right, or beginning to change. And so an example I'm in Oakland in California, and in Oakland, they have a Safe Streets initiative. Suddenly, out of the blue, from my perspective, they shut down a bunch of streets and said, we need to be able to have somewhere to get out. The parks are busy. People are using the streets, which is really wonderful. And like the rapid change is phenomenal. So, and perhaps that's a factor of all the stakeholders lining up. As you look a little bit further, you think about the cities. We're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in France as well. Big initiatives, big governmental funding to do new things around, particularly around cycling. I mean, is that going to continue? What are the challenges for the cities around that? In a sense, is there a silver lining here? Just the perfect storm has allowed them to force this stuff through. I mean, how does it play out in the future, do you think?
I think implementation is going to be key. I come from a country where we've also announced one of the largest bailout packages of all time. But the concern is around implementation, right? Will this fund or all the initiatives that are starting actually go and create the impact on the ground that the government is actually hoping to create? And for that, you need a very important public transportation and infrastructure workforce around. So, if, for example, if the London government or the British government announced a package of £2 billion to improve health infrastructure or bicycle infrastructure or a public transport infrastructure, I think the role of organizations such as Transport for London and other local operators and their capability to collaborate with shared mobility operators in the same area is going to be put to test. I think that is what is going to be the biggest challenge. If a car sharing operator, a public transport operator, as well as a micromobility operator can figure out the perfect way to work together to fill in these gaps, in order to keep in mind that it's the consumer and it's the end user who needs to be at the, who needs to have a perfect customer journey in a certain way, that is going to be the biggest challenge. And that is what I think is what cities would struggle with because they've never implemented it in the past, which is where they need people like us or people who have scaled technology driven mobility in the past. They need to have this openness to collaborate with us and work with us to find the perfect way in which a strategy like that could be implemented on the ground without funds going to waste or having the maximum return of investment or maximum impact. That is going to be the biggest challenge on that front. And I think that is what we'll deal with in the next 1 year or so.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. So sort of our on the Trōv side, we obviously our contribution is around insurance and managing risk, and you know your sentiment there really echoes the challenges. I sort of feel sorry for the cities in a sense when we start talking about insurance because it's such a complex thing, and they have so many different things to do. And now suddenly they're saying, well, how does insurance play into bicycles or scooters or whatever it may be? So yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The will is there to make the changes, but there's still a bit of challenge to actually implementing it. So moving to a slightly different topic, ahead of our conversation, you were sort of tipping your hat to another trend that you see, which is around light electric vehicles. And so maybe for those who, depending where you are in the world, the definition might be different, but I suppose what one definition would be sort of anything that has either 2 or 3 wheels, whether it's motorized or non-motorized. And so, you know, is that definition roughly about right? And what is, in your view, what is going to happen with light electric vehicles given the sort of the rapid change that we're seeing?
I think the definition is around about correct. I think the entire point of a light electric vehicle is to offset the carbon footprint of the automobile industry or the fossil fuel industry, and at the same time not take as much space as a car would take on the street. Like it depends on the kind of person you ask. Also, if you have like 4 kids, you would probably need a much larger vehicle to get around the city. But for you and me who have to get to our jobs on a daily basis, using our car does not make a lot of sense. And the crisis has made it very, very clear to us. E-bikes, for example, would fall into the category of light electric vehicles. Get Around has a project called LEV, I think, which they pivoted in the Netherlands, where they tried a smaller 4-vehicle thing which could fit into a bicycle lane and could run across the city and does not use the main road for transportation. Something like that is also a very, very important aspect of light electric vehicles because e-bikes are probably not the only thing that people would want to use. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation around it, not just by new mobility or new age companies, but also by existing OEMs. There was always this push towards sustainability and electrification. But I think that with cities now giving more real estate to bicycles and pedestrians, the real estate on roads or for roads would reduce, which would by default mean that you would have the entire thing on which you would want to keep a vehicle. Now you have to optimize the size to a completely different area. And that would lead to much more efficient use and much more sustainable use of vehicles. And I think that is where LEVs or light electric vehicles comes into play. One of the things that we are doing on that side as well is I think we will be announcing it officially next week. But we've gone into a partnership with the world's largest light electric vehicle manufacturer, Yardea, based out of China, to co-develop a sharing-ready vehicle ourselves that we will be launching hopefully next week and make it available for pre-orders by any mobility provider. Because we ourselves also believe in this entire thing and we think that is the right way to go. There's an entire value chain of mobility out there. And I think it is time where we do not ignore the vehicle aspect of it, because the vehicle aspect of it also needs to be disrupted. It's not just the technology that needs to be disrupted. And I think that is also something that will be accelerated because of all this crisis.
So I think you're really well placed to answer my next question. So it'll be a long question because I want to give you a little bit of context for where I'm coming from. So you're an Indian man in Hamburg in Germany. I'm an Irish man in California. and so we're sort of we're uniquely placed to have seen sort of trends around the way people use vehicles, and I'm sort of intrigued around the format of the light electric vehicle. In a sense, it struck me that we're missing a format which is a small, you could call it sort of a golf cart on steroids, and sort of a small, maybe a 1 or 2 person vehicle that has maybe a 5 mile to 10 mile range. You know, when you want to go to the shops and buy your, you know, your groceries. Um, and so, but there's a, for example, just a little anecdote. We, on one of our European programs, were invited to insure a car called a Renault Twizy, which, if anybody knows, there's very small, I believe they are 2 person vehicles, but they're about the quarter of the size of a regular car. And we were invited to insure those for, I believe it was 14-year-olds, and it was in France. And the North Americans among the team were like, "That's oh, well, that's a joke, right?"
Yeah.
And you know, I was lucky enough to spend some summers in Europe when I was younger, and I would see my friends, teenagers, riding around on their mopeds, which are I forget the size, maybe 50 cc motorcycles at 14 years of age. And so culturally, um, I would suggest that Europe is probably a little bit more ready to accept this sort of format of vehicle, whereas North America and maybe other places are probably, you know, a little bit more attached to the, you know, to the traditional car. Um, so, you know, maybe you'd opine a little bit around Europe's readiness to accept these new formats, and perhaps those new formats that aren't there. And similarly, it'd be interesting to get a perspective, you know, on India as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that our experience and the places we come from make it very unique. I think mobility is a very personal thing
Mm.
for most people. I think that is why, for example, the US is much more focused on the car because it's a personal thing. People want to use their cars and they should have the right to use it. If you talk about India, mobility is a completely different meaning for Indians over there. Like for them, for Indians, it's all about getting from A to B in the most efficient way possible. The focus on car production has always been how many miles to the liter can this vehicle give me, right? And it's changing over a period of time with the emergence of the upper middle class and the middle class. People are moving more towards luxury buying, but the core of the market is still dominated by companies like Hyundai or Suzuki who are making energy or fuel efficient vehicles. Um, Europe, on the other hand, for example, when I came here also had a very, very, or still does, has a very, very efficient public transportation network. If you've lived in London, you can take the tube from any place to any place. If I'm in Hamburg, I can take or depend on the public transport to take me from anywhere to anywhere. I didn't even have a bike for the first 2.5 years when I lived there. I actually bought one because of the crisis, because it was so dependable. And I think that is what kind of defines everything, right? How dependable is the existing infrastructure and what can be added on top to complement it. I think what needs to be added on top in a country like India is a lot more because that country still doesn't have bicycle lanes. That country is still struggling with getting out, metros and major cities. It's still very moving very fast towards making sure it happens, but it's still making, it's in a phase of development to a level where it could compare itself to a Berlin or London. And I think that is also what, for example, will be done in the US. There is this gap between public transportation and private car ownership, and the vehicles that go onto the street need to somehow fill in this gap. And that is how you have to, for example, look at it. That gap is smaller in Europe compared to North America or India, which is why it's easier for Europe to fill it by e-bikes or electric mopeds. But if you look at a car-dominated country like the US, it would be unfair to say that because the gap is much wider. There are still cities where public transportation is negligible. And I myself, when I did a road trip across I think the east coast of the United States, there were parts where there was a time when my car broke down and I just did not know how to get to another place because public transport was sparse. right? And over there, I think companies like Tesla and Rivian are going to play a very important role because they're trying to completely redefine the definition of a modern car using technology. So this is my, like, there is no, I don't think there is a universal perspective that you and I could arrive on today, but that is what I see. Like I see the public transport network as like a lifeline, especially, and I think the entire crisis has made it even more vulnerable because of the fact that the infection is so contagious. But just because the lifeline, it will not collapse the lifeline, and if the lifeline keeps running, it's easy for you to fill the gap, and there will be different vehicles that will fill this gap in different ways in different countries. And I think if you go to Berlin, you would see a company called ME, which operates the largest fleet of electric mopeds over there. And they've been doing an amazing job. They recently, brought their vehicles into Hamburg as well. There's Felix in the Netherlands, which is really big. They're doing it in multiple cities over there, and now launching into Belgium. But of course, if there are roads dominated with freeways in the middle of cities, I wouldn't recommend you to ride an electric moped that doesn't go beyond 40 kilometers an hour on the freeway. So you need something else, and maybe it is going to be like a supercharged version of a small three-wheeled vehicle. But I think that there are a lot of companies like Tesla and Rivian who are kind of on the forefront of that disruption in North America.
Yeah, I think you put it really well. I think that the gaps are different, right, to where different geographies are in terms of relative to maybe the mobility ideal. And I think the other aspect that you nailed as well is they're coming at it from a different angle. And even that we're talking in generalities here, right? I mean, Hamburg is different than London, that is different than LA, that is different from San Francisco or New York. So we're, speaking maybe with my North American hat on, we have programs in place that are utilizing data directly from Teslas, right, to drive the insurance. So it's there are certainly advancements. I think micromobility has a thing that has just blown through the cities in the US where it works, right? It has to have the right shape, but it's been adopted very, very rapidly. So, with that said, it's kind of, you've had quite an optimistic view, which I enjoy. It's been a fun conversation. I'm going to maybe put you on the spot with the last question, which is one I've sort of asked everybody to date, which is, it's time for a prediction. So look forward a little bit, let's say 2 to 3 years. I think the industry had a fairly well understood vision of what mobility was, the direction we were headed in terms of mobility. Perhaps that changed, but I'd love to get your view on where do you think we're going to be in 2 to 3 years?
I think the industry was, for example, moving to a certain sense of consolidation already before the crisis. But I think the crisis really accelerated that. I think we've been seeing it with Uber investing in Line and making investments into Grubhub, trying to acquire that because delivery is going to be a really, really important part over here. So I think the entire consolidation phase, even though we're in the middle of it, I don't know how close we are towards the end. I think there is going to be consolidation. We have to make sure that supply meets demand, and there's no and by making sure that you're part of the crisis, you have to optimize for cash and revenue. So I think companies will be forced to do that. But that is like a short-term view. I think that would be over in the next 6 months or so. And after that, you will see the how do you say, a lot of local players emerging. I think there's going to be a resurgence of local companies coming out of cities who really know their city better than any of these international companies. And they would be able to, they don't need a fleet of 50,000 or 500,000 vehicles at any given point of time. They just need a fleet of 150 to be deployed in a city like Düsseldorf, where the fleet's job is to make sure that it fills in the gap that public transportation is not able to fill in. And there will be much more openness to adoption of those things because in this entire crisis, like I said, I never used to ride a bike, but now I am. And I know for a fact that 3 years later, my wife would too. And neither of us would want to own it because if we are able to get it on demand, it's the easiest way to get around the city and the quickest way or the most efficient way to get around the city as possible. And I think that cities have shown great intent towards making that happen. And hopefully, there will be a lot more collaboration between cities and organizations and private operators towards making sure that a vision like that can come to reality and we don't get lost in the maze of bureaucracy where major players get stuck in tenders and stuff like that. I think these are the three things, if I would say, are going to happen. Consolidation leading to adoption of new mobility, leading to cities encouraging it. It's something that we saw had already started, and I think that it would have happened in like 10 years or so, where we could have said now it's perfect. But I think that that thing would have been reduced to at least 5 years now, because there's a lot of impetus going in from a lot of angles towards the same vision. That's very important.
That's great. Well, thank you, Rachit. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Ian. It was really great talking to you. It's always fun to talk about mobility, and I hope that the industry would come out stronger on the other side.
Great. Thank you.